The Quiet Ledger. Vivian Ashford had loved one man for 48 years. She had buried him on a Wednesday. And now, 3 months later, she was learning that she had never truly known him at all. But that discovery was still ahead of her. On the morning this story begins, Vivian was doing what she had done every day since Jean died. She was sitting at the kitchen table in their small house on Harwell Street in Greystone, Vermont, staring at the empty chair across from her and trying to remember how to breathe through a whole day without him. The chair was wooden, with a slight lean to the left where one leg had always been shorter than the others. Jean had meant to fix it for 30 years. He never did. Every morning he sat in that crooked chair, drank black coffee from the same white mug, and read the newspaper from front to back while Vivian made toast and pretended not to watch him. It was the most boring routine in the world. She would have given anything to have it back. Eugene Ashford had been the kind of man that most people forgot 5 minutes after meeting him. Thin, quiet, always in pressed khaki pants and button-down shirts that were never quite the right shade for his complexion. He was a tax accountant who worked for a small firm in Burlington for 26 years before going independent. He balanced numbers the way some men built furniture, with patience and precision, and a quiet satisfaction that never needed an audience. They met in 1976 at a church potluck in Montpelier. Vivian was 22 and working as a secretary at the county hospital. Jean was 24 and already losing his hair. He asked her to dance even though there was no music playing, and she said yes even though she thought he was strange. They were married 4 months later. Her mother said it was too fast. Her father said nothing, which meant he approved. 48 years. 2 children, 1 house, paid off in 22 years. A life so steady and predictable that Vivian sometimes felt like she could see the next 10 years laid out in front of her like a road with no turns. And then Jean had a stroke on a Tuesday afternoon while reading the newspaper at that crooked kitchen table. By the time the ambulance arrived, he was already gone. The coffee in his mug was still warm. The weeks after his death moved in a strange fog. Vivian went through the motions of grief the way she had gone through the motions of living, one step at a time, one task at a time. She sorted his clothes. She filed his papers. She canceled his magazine subscriptions and forwarded his mail. She cleaned out his desk drawer and found 7 pens, a roll of stamps, and a small notebook filled with numbers she did not understand. She threw the notebook away without thinking about it. She would regret that later. The house felt enormous without him. Not because it was large. It was a modest Cape Cod with 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a basement that flooded every spring. But without Jean in it, every room seemed to stretch in all directions, as if the walls themselves were pulling away from her. She took her blood pressure medication every morning at 7. She put on her reading glasses to check the mail. She noticed that her hands ached more than usual when the weather turned, the arthritis in her fingers tightening like small, invisible fists. She was 70 years old, and her body reminded her of that fact every single day. Her daughter Rosemary called every evening at 8. Rosie was 42 and taught high school English in Montpelier, 40 minutes away. She was gentle and careful with her words, the way people are when they are afraid of saying the wrong thing to someone who is grieving. She asked how Vivian was eating. She asked if Vivian was sleeping. She never asked the question that mattered most, which was whether Vivian had any reason to get out of bed in the morning. The answer, most days, was no. Her son was a different matter entirely. Graydon Ashford was 46 years old. He was a real estate attorney in Burlington. He had his father's thin frame and his mother's dark eyes, but somewhere along the way, he had developed a hardness that neither of his parents recognized. He drove a car that cost more than Vivian's house was worth. His wife, Corinne, wore jewelry that clicked when she moved, and she moved constantly, always adjusting something, her hair, her rings, her opinion of everyone around her. Graydon came to the house 9 days after the funeral. He brought papers. Vivian remembered that visit clearly because it was the first time since Jean's death that she felt something other than grief. She felt afraid. Graydon sat at the kitchen table in Jean's chair. Vivian almost asked him to move but stopped herself. He spread 3 documents in front of her and explained each one in the patient, practiced voice he used with clients, The first was a power of attorney, granting Graydon control over Vivian's financial accounts and property decisions. The second was a listing agreement, authorizing the sale of the house on Harwell Street. The third was an admission form for Pinecrest Senior Living, a facility on the outskirts of Burlington. He said all the right things. He said he was worried about her being alone. He said the house was too much for one person to maintain. He said Pinecrest was a wonderful community with activities and medical staff and people her own age. He said it was what Dad would have wanted. And Vivian, sitting in her kitchen with swollen eyes and trembling hands and a grief so heavy she could barely hold her head up, signed all 3 documents. She did not read the fine print. She did not ask questions. She trusted her son because she had always trusted her son, the way she had always trusted Jean, the way she had always trusted that the people she loved would not use her worst moments against her. 2 weeks later, she discovered what she had done. The bank called first. A woman with a professionally sympathetic voice explained that Vivian's checking and savings accounts had been placed under Graydon's authority. Vivian could no longer withdraw funds, write checks, or make transfers without his approval. Then the real estate agent called. A man named Phil who spoke too quickly and used the word fantastic 4 times in 90 seconds. He wanted to schedule showings of the house starting the following Monday. He said Graydon had already approved the listing price. Finally, Pinecrest called. A woman named Darlene who said Vivian's room would be ready by the end of the month. Room 14B, 2nd floor. A lovely view of the garden. Vivian sat at the kitchen table and felt the walls close in for real this time. Not the slow, stretching emptiness of grief. Something tighter. Something deliberate. She called Graydon. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice casual, as if they were discussing weekend plans. "Mom, you're 70 years old," he said. "You can't live alone in that house. The roof needs work. The furnace is 20 years old. What happens when you fall and nobody is there? This is the responsible thing to do." She heard Corinne's voice in the background, faint but clear. "Tell her it's what Jean would have wanted." Graydon repeated the line without hesitation. "It's what Dad would have wanted." Vivian hung up the phone and sat in silence for a long time. Outside, the maples along Harwell Street were dropping the last of their leaves. The sky was the color of a bruise. She had been married for 48 years to a man who never once made a decision about her life without asking her first. And now, within 2 weeks of his death, her own son had taken control of everything she had without even pretending to ask. If you believe that the people we love sometimes reveal themselves most clearly in the moments after loss, then stay with this story. Subscribe now, because what Vivian discovers next will change everything you think you know about quiet men and hidden lives. And it begins with a letter that should never have been forwarded. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning in a plain white envelope. It was addressed to Eugene Ashford and had been forwarded by the post office, which was still redirecting Jean's mail to the house. Vivian almost threw it away. She had been throwing away Jean's mail for weeks. Advertisements, expired coupons, renewal notices for memberships he would never use again. But the return address stopped her. Harbor Storage Solutions, 741 Industrial Way, Greystone, Vermont. Vivian turned the envelope over in her hands. She opened it at the kitchen counter, carefully, the way she opened everything now, as if each piece of paper might contain a small piece of Jean she had not yet found. Inside was a printed notice. It informed Mr. Eugene Ashford that payment for storage unit C17 was due at the end of the month. The notice included an account number, a monthly rate, and a rental history that went back 18 years. 18 years. Vivian read the letter 3 times. She set it down on the counter and picked it up again. She held it under the light as if the words might rearrange themselves into something that made sense. A storage unit. Her husband had rented a storage unit in Greystone for 18 years and never told her. Their house had a basement, an attic, and a small shed in the backyard where Jean kept his tools. What could he possibly need a storage unit for? And why had he never mentioned it? Not once. Not in 18 years. Not in 48 years of marriage. The questions multiplied like cracks in glass. But beneath the confusion, something else was growing. Something that felt uncomfortably like betrayal. Gene had always left the house on Tuesday mornings. He said he had errands in town, appointments with former clients, paperwork to drop off. He was usually gone for 4 or 5 hours. Vivian never questioned it. She had no reason to. Gene was not the kind of man who lied. Gene was not the kind of man who had secrets. Or so she had believed. She was still holding the letter when the phone rang. It was Graydon. He did not ask how she was. He asked about the mail. Specifically, he asked if anything unusual had arrived for Jean. Vivian realized with a slow, sinking feeling that Graydon was monitoring her mail. He had probably set up a forwarding request of his own. "There's nothing," Vivian said. It was the first lie she had told her son in his entire life. "If anything comes from a bank or a financial institution, you need to let me know," Graydon said. "I'm handling Dad's estate. I need to see everything." Vivian said she understood. She hung up the phone, folded the letter from harbor storage, and slipped it into the pocket of her cardigan. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, from something that had been sleeping inside her for a very long time and was only now beginning to wake up. She hid the letter inside the lining of her sewing box, a place Graydon would never think to look. Then she lay awake until 2 in the morning, staring at the ceiling and listening to the house settle around her, trying to understand why her husband of 48 years had kept a secret for nearly 2 decades, and trying to figure out how to get to that storage unit before Graydon did. The problem was the car. Gene's car, a 12-year-old sedan that Vivian had been driving since his death, was parked in the driveway. But Graydon had taken the spare key during one of his visits, slipping it off the hook by the back door when he thought she was not looking. Vivian had noticed but said nothing at the time. Now she understood why. She still had the main key. But she suspected Graydon might be tracking the car. He was that kind of careful. The kind of careful that looked like concern but felt like control. On a cold Friday morning in late October, Vivian put on her warmest coat, laced up the walking shoes she had not worn in months, slipped the storage letter into her pocket, and walked out the front door. Harbor Storage Solutions was 3 miles from the house on Harwell Street. 3 miles was nothing for a younger person. For a 70-year-old woman with arthritic knees and a blood pressure that her doctor described as manageable but stubborn, it was a journey. The first mile was fine. The sidewalks along Harwell Street were even, and the morning air was crisp but not yet bitter. Vivian walked at a steady pace, her breath forming small clouds that dissolved before they reached the bare branches above her. The second mile was harder. The sidewalk ended at the edge of the commercial district, and she had to walk along the shoulder of Route 4, where trucks passed close enough to press the air against her face. Her knees began to ache, a deep, grinding pain that made each step feel like a negotiation between her body and her will. She stopped twice. Once beside a mailbox outside a gas station, where she leaned against the post and waited for the pain to settle from sharp to dull. Once at a bus stop bench where she sat for 5 minutes and watched the traffic pass. An older man in a pickup truck slowed down and asked if she needed a ride. She shook her head and thanked him. She was not going to arrive at her husband's secret in someone else's car. The third mile took her along Industrial Way, a stretch of warehouses and storage facilities that she had driven past 100 times without ever paying attention. Harbor Storage Solutions was at the end of the road, a long row of beige metal buildings behind a chain-link fence topped with rusted barbed wire. The kind of place where people kept boat trailers and old furniture and the physical evidence of lives that had outgrown their closets. The office was a small room attached to the first building. Behind the counter stood a man in his early 60s with a gray crew cut, broad shoulders, and the kind of posture that suggested he had once been trained to stand at attention. His name tag read, Clyde Fenton, Manager. When Vivian said her name, something changed in Clyde Fenton's face. It was subtle, a slight tightening around the eyes, a breath held half a second too long, but Vivian noticed it the way women notice things that men think they are hiding. "Mrs. Ashford," Clyde said. He looked at her for a moment as if deciding something. Then he turned to his computer. "Your husband rented Unit C-17 for a long time. You're listed as the emergency contact, so you're authorized for access. He reached beneath the counter and produced a small brass key attached to a yellow plastic tag. Has anyone else asked about this unit? Vivian asked. Clyde hesitated. A man called yesterday, said he was your son, said he was handling the estate and wanted access. What did you tell him? I told him only the account holder or the emergency contact could access the unit. He wasn't happy about that. Vivian took the key. Her fingers closed around it, the metal cold against her palm. Mrs. Ashford, Clyde said as she turned to leave. He paused again, struggling with something. Your husband was a good man. I want you to know that. Vivian looked at him. You knew Gene? Clyde's jaw tightened. He helped me once, a long time ago. I owe him more than I can say. He did not elaborate, and Vivian did not ask. Not yet. She walked down the narrow corridor between the storage units, reading the numbers as she passed. C13, C14, C15. The hallway smelled like concrete dust and metal and the faint, closed-up mustiness of things that had been sitting still for years. C17. The door was gray metal, slightly scratched, with a small padlock hanging from the latch. Ordinary in every way. But Vivian's hands were trembling as she raised the key, and her heart was beating with a force that made her ribs ache. She stood there for nearly a full minute. Part of her wanted to turn around and walk back home and pretend the letter had never arrived. Part of her wanted to call Rosie. Part of her wanted Gene to be standing beside her, explaining everything in that calm, quiet voice that had guided her through 48 years of marriage. But Gene was gone. And whatever was behind this door, he had chosen to keep it from her. She slid the key into the lock and turned it. The mechanism clicked open with a sharp sound that echoed off the concrete walls. Vivian gripped the bottom of the rolling door and pulled it upward. She expected dust. She expected darkness. She expected stacks of forgotten boxes filled with old tax returns and outdated client files. What she saw made her take a full step backward. The storage unit was not a storage unit. It was an office. A wooden desk sat against the far wall, neat and organized, with a closed laptop computer in the center and a small framed photograph beside it. Filing cabinets lined the left wall, 6 of them, each labeled with dates spanning nearly 2 decades. Shelves on the right held dozens of boxes, each one marked with a handwritten label in Gene's careful, slanted print. And covering the entire back wall, a large corkboard. Pinned to it were photographs, maps, handwritten notes, printed documents, and index cards connected by colored string. Vivian walked inside slowly. The concrete floor was cold through the soles of her shoes. The air smelled like paper and ink and something else. Something familiar. Gene's aftershave. Faint, almost gone, but unmistakably his, as if the room had been holding its breath since the last time he walked out and closed the door behind him. She approached the desk first. The photograph beside the laptop was of her. It was taken at least 20 years ago in the backyard of the house on Harwell Street, and she was laughing at something off camera. She had no memory of the moment, but Gene had kept it here, in this secret room, where he came every Tuesday to do whatever it was he had been doing for 18 years. Vivian picked up the photograph and held it to her chest, and for a moment, the grief came back so hard that she had to sit down in the desk chair and wait for it to pass. When she could breathe again, she reached for one of the binders on the desk. The label on the front read Family Assistance, 2012. She opened it. The first page was a printed form listing a family's name, an address in a neighboring town, and a note written in Gene's handwriting. Rent paid for March, April, and May. $2,400 total. Delivered cash via P.O. Box arrangement. Vivian turned to the next page. Grocery receipts. $387.42 for a family of 5. Delivered anonymously through Church Food Bank with specific instructions for dietary needs. The next page, medical bill. $1,100 for an emergency room visit. Paid directly to the hospital billing department under the name Tom Callahan. Tom Callahan. Jean had used a fake name. Vivian's hands began to shake as she flipped through the rest of the binder. Every page was the same. Different families, different needs, different amounts, but always the same careful documentation, the same precise handwriting, the same quiet, invisible generosity. She grabbed another binder. Family Assistance, 2015. More names, more receipts, more notes. School tuition for a single mother's daughter. Car repair for a man who needed his vehicle to get to work. Winter heating oil for an elderly couple whose furnace had broken. One entry near the middle of a binder from 2017 caught her eye briefly. A notation that read, Tully W. Medical bills, spouse terminal illness, $8,000. She did not recognize the name. She moved on. She would remember it later. She opened a third binder, a fourth, a fifth. 18 years of records, hundreds of families, tens of thousands of dollars. And then Vivian looked at the corkboard on the back wall. The photographs showed smiling children, families standing in front of modest homes, a woman holding a set of car keys, a man in a graduation cap. Beside each photograph was a handwritten thank you note or a card. One card read, "You saved our family when we had nowhere else to go. We will never forget what Tom did for us." Another, "Because of you, my children still have a home. God bless you, Tom, whoever you are." A third, written in a child's handwriting with a crayon drawing of a house. "Thank you for helping my mom. She smiles now." Vivian stood in front of that corkboard for a very long time. The tears came, but she did not wipe them away. She let them fall onto the concrete floor, onto her shoes, onto the sleeves of her coat. For 18 years, every Tuesday, her husband had come to this room. He had sat at this desk and organized this work. He had tracked every dollar, documented every family, filed every receipt. He had helped hundreds of people and never told a single one of them his real name. And he had never told her. Not once. Not in 18 years of Tuesdays. Not in 48 years of marriage. Vivian did not know what she felt. It was too many things at once. Amazement. Admiration. And beneath it all, deep and sharp and impossible to ignore, a hurt that felt worse than grief. He had not trusted her with this. The man who shared her bed, her table, her life for nearly 5 decades had kept an entire world hidden from her. Why? Did he think she would disapprove? Did he think she would try to stop him? Did he think she was not capable of understanding? She closed the binder and placed it back on the desk. She turned off the light, pulled down the rolling door and locked it. Then she walked 3 miles home in the cold, and she did not cry again until she was inside the house with the door closed behind her. That night, she lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and asked the empty room a question she knew would never be answered. "Why didn't you tell me, Jean?" The house did not answer. The house never answered. And outside, the wind moved through the bare trees on Harwell Street, carrying the last of autumn with it. What would you do if you discovered the person you loved most had been living a second life you never knew about? Not a dark secret, not a betrayal, something else entirely, something you could not yet name. Write your answer in the comments. And keep watching, because Vivian is about to learn something that will change everything. For 4 days, Vivian tried to forget about storage unit C17. She told herself it did not matter. Jean was gone. Whatever he had been doing was over. The families he had helped were helped. The money he had spent was spent. There was nothing to be gained by digging further into the private world of a dead man. But the questions would not stop. They followed her through the house like a draft she could not locate. Where did the money come from? Jean's accounting salary had been modest. Their savings were thin. They had never taken an expensive vacation or bought a luxury item. How had he given away tens of thousands of dollars without her noticing? And the name. Tom Callahan. Why had Jean chosen a fake name? Who was Tom Callahan? On the 4th night, Unable to sleep, Vivian went downstairs and sat at the kitchen table. She opened the drawer where Jean had kept his personal papers and pulled out a folder she had not yet examined. Inside were bank statements from the past 3 years. She studied them line by line, the way Jean had taught her to read a budget, and found something she had missed before: deposits. Small, irregular deposits made every month into a separate account she had never known existed. The amounts varied from $800 to $2,000. The source was listed as Callahan Consulting. Callahan Consulting. Jean had been doing freelance accounting work under a fake name for 18 years, and every dollar he earned had gone directly into funding his silent operation. Vivian closed the folder and sat in the dark kitchen for a long time. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, each second filling the silence the way water fills an empty glass. Her husband had built a secret life. Not out of deception, she was beginning to understand, but out of a conviction so deep that it needed its own separate world to exist in. A world where kindness was not a conversation. It was an action. Anonymous. Unwitnessed. Complete. She still did not understand why he had kept it from her. But she was no longer angry. She was curious. The next morning, she walked back to Harbor Storage Solutions. Clyde Fenton was waiting for her. Not, obviously. He was behind the counter, sorting papers, but Vivian noticed that he looked up the moment she appeared in the doorway, as if he had been listening for her footsteps. His eyes moved to her face, checking for something. She did not know what. "I'd like to go back to C-17, Vivian said. Clyde nodded. He reached for the logbook, but then stopped. "Mrs. Ashford," he said carefully, "before you go in there today, I need to tell you something." Vivian waited. Clyde placed both hands flat on the counter. The gesture reminded her of Jean. The same deliberateness, the same way of grounding himself before saying something important. "Your husband gave me instructions," Clyde said. "Years ago. He said if anything ever happened to him, I was to make sure you were the one who opened that unit. Not your son, not a lawyer, you. He said you would understand when you saw it." "He was wrong about that," Vivian said. "I don't understand any of it." Clyde looked at her steadily. "He also said if you came back a second time, it meant you were ready." "Ready for what?" Clyde reached beneath the counter again and produced a second key, smaller than the first, silver instead of brass. "There's a locked drawer in the desk," he said. "This opens it. Jean taped a copy underneath the desk, but he gave me the original for safekeeping." Vivian took the key. It was warm from Clyde's hand. "How long did you know my husband?" she asked. Clyde was quiet for a moment. Then he said, 16 years. He helped me when I had nothing. I came back from the Navy, couldn't find work, lost my apartment. Jean paid 4 months of rent for me and helped me get this job. I didn't know his real name for the first 2 years. He was just Tom." He cleared his throat. "Your husband came here every Tuesday like clockwork. Stayed 4-5 hours. He always brought a thermos of black coffee. And he always talked about you." Vivian's vision blurred. She blinked hard and nodded. "Thank you, Clyde." She walked down the corridor to C-17, unlocked the rolling door, and stepped inside. The desk, the cabinets, the corkboard with its gallery of faces and gratitude, all of it waiting in the same patient silence Jean had left behind. She sat down at the desk and opened the laptop. The screen glowed to life and asked for a password. Vivian stared at the blinking cursor for a long time, then typed the date of their wedding. The desktop appeared. A few folders arranged neatly against a dark blue background. One of them was labeled Second Start. She clicked it open. Inside were spreadsheets listing dozens of names, each with a small notation beside it. Rent paid, medical assistance, car repair, school tuition, groceries, ongoing. The amounts varied from a few hundred to several $1,000s. Some families appeared multiple times across different years. Some had notes that said resolved, no further assistance needed. Others simply said continuing. Vivian scrolled through the record slowly, pausing at each name, each notation. These were not abstract numbers to her anymore. Each line represented a family that had been falling and had been caught, silently, by a man they knew only as Tom. She turned to the filing cabinets. The first two contained the same kind of records she had found in the binders, organized by year, meticulous and complete. The third cabinet held correspondence, letters from families, thank you cards, photographs, a drawing from a child who had written "Thank you, Tom" in green crayon. The fourth cabinet was different. It was labeled personal, and inside Vivian found something that made her stop breathing. A thick notebook with a dark brown leather cover, worn smooth at the edges from years of handling. She opened it and recognized Jean's handwriting immediately, though the first entry was written in a hand steadier and younger than the one she had known in recent years. The first entry was dated 18 years ago. Met a man outside the grocery store today. Lost his job and his apartment in the same month. His name is Darren. He has 2 kids. He wasn't asking for help. He was just sitting on the bench outside the store, staring at the ground, and I could see it in his face. That look. I've seen that look before. I gave him $200 and told him to call me if he needed more. He cried. A grown man sitting on a bench, crying because a stranger gave him $200. That shouldn't be how the world works. If I ever get the chance to do this regularly, I should. Vivian turned the pages slowly. Entry after entry described people Jean had met or heard about through the years. Families on the edge of eviction. Parents choosing between medicine and groceries. Workers laid off without warning. Elderly couples too proud to ask for help. Each time, Jean had made the same quiet decision. He had helped them. He had used the money he earned through his freelance work, filed under the name Tom Callahan, and he had given it away, always anonymously, always without expectation. One entry, dated 12 years ago, made Vivian pause. Went to the library today to return some books Vivian had finished. Met the librarian, Henrietta Marsh. We got to talking. She told me she sees people every day who come in to use the free computers because they can't afford internet at home. Job applications, government aid forms, resume building. She knows who in town is struggling. She knows before anyone else. I asked her if she would be willing to let me know when someone needed help. She was suspicious at first, asked me what I wanted in return. I told her the truth. Nothing. I just want to help. She agreed to try it once. That was 6 families ago. Henri is the best partner I could have asked for. She sees what nobody else sees. Vivian closed the journal for a moment and stared at the wall. Henrietta Marsh, the librarian at the Greystone Public Library. Vivian had met her perhaps 3 or 4 times over the years. Brief interactions at the checkout desk, polite exchanges about book recommendations. She had no idea Henry and Jean had known each other. No idea they had been working together for over a decade. She needed to talk to Henri. But first, she turned to a section of the journal that was marked with a folded piece of paper. The entry was dated 7 years ago, and Jean's handwriting was different here. Smaller, more careful. As if he was writing something he had never intended anyone to read. I haven't told Vivian about any of this. I've thought about it 100 times. She would understand. I know she would. She has the biggest heart of anyone I've ever met. But I'm afraid that if I tell her, it will become something we do together, something we talk about, something that has a name and a shape. And I think that would change it. What I do works because nobody knows. The families don't know who I am. The people around me don't know what I'm doing. And that's what makes it real. If I do this for recognition, even recognition from the woman I love, then it becomes about me. And it was never supposed to be about me. Kindness works best when nobody is watching. I hope she forgives me for keeping this secret. I hope she understands that it was never about trust. I trusted her more than anyone alive. It was about protecting something fragile, something that would break if too many people touched it. Vivian read the passage twice. Then she closed the journal and pressed it against her chest. She sat in that chair in storage unit C17 for nearly an hour, holding her husband's journal and letting the silence fill the spaces between what she had known and what she was only now beginning to understand. Then she opened the journal again and kept reading. And the deeper she went, the more she realized that the man she had loved for 48 years had been carrying a weight she never imagined. 23 pages into the journal, Jean had written something that changed everything. The entry was dated 15 years ago. The handwriting was tight and controlled, as if Jean had been pressing the pen hard against the paper. "I've never told anyone this. Not Vivian, not the children, not anyone. My father left when I was 12 years old. He didn't die, he didn't go to war, he didn't move away for a job. He went bankrupt, lost everything. And one morning he got in his car and drove away and never came back. My mother raised 3 children alone after that. She worked 2 jobs. She went without meals so we could eat. She never asked for help because she was too proud, and because in those days people didn't talk about being poor. They just were. She died when I was 30. Worked herself to death is the truth of it. And I stood at her funeral and made a promise that I would never let another family go through what she went through. Not if I could help it. That's why I do this. That's why I can't stop." Vivian set the journal down on the desk. Her eyes were burning, but she was past crying now. She was in a place beyond tears, a place where the weight of what she was learning pressed against her chest like a hand. Jean had never told her about his father. In 48 years, he had never once mentioned that his father left. He had said his father died when Jean was young. That was the story. That was what the children believed. That was what Vivian had repeated to friends and family for nearly 5 decades. It was a lie, and now she understood why Jean had built this secret operation. Not out of guilt, not out of obligation, out of a wound so deep that he could not speak about it, could only try to heal it by preventing the same wound in others. She picked up the journal again and turned to the final entries. The handwriting in the last pages was shakier, the letters less certain. Jean's hands had been getting worse in his final year. The arthritis that Vivian shared with him, his in his fingers, hers in her knees, the small cruelties of age that they had endured together without complaint. The last entry was dated 3 weeks before Jean died. "If Vivian ever finds this place, I hope she understands why I kept it quiet. I never wanted recognition. I just wanted to help where I could. If she decides this work should continue, she'll do it better than I did. She has a courage I never had, the courage to be seen." Below this, a single line, written in a hand so shaky it was almost illegible. "The letter is in the locked drawer." Vivian looked at the small silver key Clyde had given her. She had forgotten about the locked drawer. Now her hands trembled as she slid the key into the lock and turned it. If you've ever held something in your hands and known in your bones, that your life was about to change, then you understand what Vivian felt in that moment. The drawer opened slowly, and what she found inside would not only change her life, it would save it. The drawer contained 3 things. The first was a sealed envelope with Vivian written on the front in Jean's handwriting. The second was a thick legal document bound with a blue cover. The third was a folder labeled Sandoval, urgent, not yet completed. Vivian set the envelope aside. She was not ready for Jean's last words. Not yet. She reached for the legal document first. She opened it and read the cover page. Irrevocable Trust Agreement. Established by Eugene R. Ashford. Beneficiary. Vivian M. Ashford. She turned the pages, trying to understand the legal language, but the key details were clear enough. Jean had established a trust. An irrevocable trust. The kind that could not be altered, seized, or controlled by anyone other than the named beneficiary. The kind that existed completely outside the reach of any power of attorney. The trust held $340,000. Vivian read the number 3 times. $340,000. Accumulated over 18 years from Jean's freelance accounting work. Set aside in a trust that bore only her name. Graydon could not touch it. The power of attorney he had tricked her into signing was meaningless against an irrevocable trust. Jean had known this. Jean had planned for this. Jean had known what Graydon would do. The realization hit Vivian like a wave. Jean had seen it coming. He had seen the hardness growing in their son, the greed that Corinne encouraged, the slow erosion of the boy Graydon had once been into the man he had become. And Jean, in his quiet, methodical accountant's way, had built a wall around Vivian's future that Graydon could not breach. He had spent 18 years helping strangers, and he had spent those same 18 years protecting his wife from their own son. Vivian closed the trust document and sat very still. Then she picked up the folder labeled Sandoval. Inside was a case file, the same kind Jean had kept for every family he helped. But this one was different. It was incomplete. The last note, written in Jean's handwriting, read, "Follow up next month. Rent payment due November 15th. Do not let this family lose their apartment." The family was a woman named Lucia Sandoval, 35 years old, night shift nurse at a clinic in Rutland, single mother, one daughter, age 7. Lucia had fallen behind on rent after unexpected medical bills. Jean had planned to cover 2 months of rent, a total of $2,400. But Jean had died before he could make the payment. November 15th was 12 days away. Vivian looked at the date. Then she looked at the trust document. Then she looked at the photograph of herself on Jean's desk, the one where she was laughing at something she could not remember. She closed the folder and placed it in her bag along with Jean's journal. She locked the drawer, closed the filing cabinet, and pulled down the rolling door of storage unit C17. Then she walked to the Greystone Public Library. The library was a brick building on Main Street that had been there since Vivian was a child. It smelled like old paper and floor polish, and the peculiar warmth of a place where people went to be quietly together. Henrietta Marsh was behind the reference desk. She was 67 years old, with silver hair cut short and reading glasses that she wore on a beaded chain around her neck. She looked up when Vivian approached and smiled the professional smile of a librarian greeting a patron. "Can I help you find something?" "My name is Vivian Ashford," Vivian said. "I'm Jean's wife." The smile disappeared. Henry's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: surprise, recognition, sadness, and finally something that looked like relief. "I wondered when you'd come," Henry said quietly. She removed her glasses and folded them carefully. "I've been wondering since the funeral." "You were at the funeral?" "Back row. Jean would have wanted me there, but he wouldn't have wanted me to introduce myself. Not yet." They went to a small meeting room at the back of the library. Henry closed the door and sat across from Vivian at a wooden table covered in book repair supplies. "How much do you know?" Henry asked. "I know about the storage unit," Vivian said. "I know about the families. I know he used the name Tom Callahan. And I know you helped him." Henry nodded slowly. 12 years. Jean came to me 12 years ago. He'd already been doing it on his own for 6 years, finding people who needed help. But he wanted a better system. He wanted to find people before they hit bottom. I see them first, you know. At the library. They come in to use the computers. They come in because the library is warm and free and nobody asks you to buy anything. I can tell who's struggling. I've been doing this long enough to see it. And you gave their names to Jean. Never their names. Not at first. I would describe the situation. A single father, 2 kids, just lost his job. A grandmother raising her grandchildren on Social Security. Jean would find them on his own. He didn't want anyone to feel like they'd been reported. Vivian absorbed this. Did anyone else know? Clyde Fenton at the storage facility. And me. That's all. Jean was very careful about that. Why? Vivian asked. Why the secrecy? Why not just start a charity? Why not ask for donations? Henri looked at her for a long moment. You read his journal? Yes. Then you know about his father? Yes. Henry leaned forward. Jean believed that the moment you organize kindness, the moment you give it a name and a board of directors and a newsletter, it stops being about the people you're helping and starts being about the people doing the helping. He didn't want donors. He didn't want volunteers. He didn't want anyone to look at what he was doing and see an opportunity for self-congratulation. She paused. He wanted it to be invisible, the way his mother's suffering had been invisible. He wanted the help to appear the same way the hardship appeared. Quietly. Without warning. Without anyone having to ask. Vivian sat with this for a long time. Outside the meeting room window, she could see the main floor of the library, where a young woman with tired eyes was sitting at a computer, typing slowly with one hand while holding a sleeping toddler in the other arm. "There's a family," Vivian said. "Lucia Sandoval. Jean was going to help them, but he died before he could." Henri's expression tightened. "I know about Lucia. She's one of mine. I've been watching her situation get worse for the past 2 months. I didn't know what to do after Jean passed. Her rent is due in 12 days. I know." Vivian reached into her bag and took out Jean's journal. She placed it on the table between them. "I found a trust," she said. "Jean left me money that my son can't touch. Enough to continue this work." Henri studied her face. "Are you sure that's what you want to do?" Vivian thought about the question. She thought about the empty chair at her kitchen table. She thought about the 3-mile walk in the cold. She thought about Graydon's voice on the phone, telling her she was too old to live her own life. "My husband spent 18 years helping people without anyone knowing," Vivian said. "He kept it from me because he thought I'd change it. Maybe he was right. Maybe I will change it. But I won't stop it." Henri reached across the table and covered Vivian's hand with her own. "Then let me help you. If you're still here, thank you. The best part of this story is still coming. Hit that like button to let the algorithm know this story deserves to be heard." Now let me tell you what Vivian did next. The next morning, Vivian withdrew $2,400 from the trust account. She placed the cash in an envelope, wrote Lucia Sandoval's address on the front, and drove to the apartment complex on the east side of Greystone. She did not deliver the envelope directly. Jean had never delivered payments directly. Instead, she left it with the building superintendent, a tired woman named Patrice, who looked at the envelope and then at Vivian, and then back at the envelope. "This covers 2 months," Vivian said. "For apartment 4C, Lucia Sandoval." "Who are you?" Patrice asked. "Nobody," Vivian said. "I'm nobody." She walked back to her car and sat behind the wheel for a long time. Her hands were steady on the steering wheel. Her heart was beating at a normal pace. The ache in her knees was still there, but it felt distant, as if her body had decided to set the pain aside for a while and let her feel something else instead. Something shifted inside her chest. The weight she had been carrying since the funeral did not disappear, but it changed shape. It became lighter, more bearable, almost purposeful. She spent the next 11 days the way Jean must have spent his Tuesdays. She went to the storage unit in the mornings, reviewed the files, updated the records, and identified the families that still needed help. Henri brought her new names from the library, carefully, discreetly, the way she had done it with Jean. Clyde kept watch over the storage facility and made sure no one accessed C-17 without Vivian's knowledge. It was quiet work, invisible work. And Vivian understood for the first time why Jean had loved it. She helped 3 more families in those 11 days. A heating oil delivery for an elderly man whose furnace had broken. Grocery gift cards left in the mailbox of a family with 4 children. A medical bill paid at the Rutland Hospital for a woman who had been putting off treatment because she could not afford the copay. Each time, Vivian followed Jean's rules. No names, no explanations, no expectations. Each time, the weight shifted a little more. And then, on the 12th day, Graydon found out about the trust. Vivian learned later how it happened. When she had asked Warren Tully, the retired attorney she had not yet met, to help her revoke the power of attorney. But that part comes later. The discovery itself came through a simpler channel. Graydon, who checked every financial record connected to Jean's estate with the thoroughness of a man searching for loose bills in a burning house, had found a reference to the trust in Jean's personal tax filings. An irrevocable trust creates its own tax return. Jean had filed them faithfully every year. And Graydon, sorting through Jean's tax records at his Burlington office, found the trail. He arrived at the house on Harwell Street at 7:30 in the evening, unannounced, with Corinne beside him, and a look on his face that Vivian had never seen before. It was not anger, exactly. It was something colder. The expression of a man who has discovered that the world is not arranged the way he assumed, and who blames someone else for the rearrangement. Graydon did not knock. He used his key, the one he had taken from the hook by the back door weeks ago. He walked into the kitchen where Vivian was sitting at the table with a cup of tea, and he stood over her, breathing hard. $340,000, Graydon said. Vivian looked up at him. She set down her tea. Dad had $340,000 in a trust, in your name, and you knew about it. I didn't know about it until last week, Vivian said. That's not what I asked. You know about it now, and you've been spending it. You've been giving it away to strangers. I've been continuing your father's work. Graydon pulled out a chair and sat down. Corinne stood behind him, her arms crossed, her rings catching the kitchen light. His work, Graydon repeated. Mom, Dad was a tax accountant. His work was filing returns and balancing books. He didn't have a work that involved giving away hundreds of thousands of dollars to people he'd never met. He did, Vivian said. For 18 years, and the only reason you didn't know about it is because he didn't want you to. Something shifted in Graydon's face. A crack in the cold exterior. For just a moment, Vivian saw the boy he had been at 10 years old, confused and hurt and trying not to show it. Then, the crack closed. Here's what's going to happen, Graydon said. I'm going to file a petition with the court to have you declared incompetent. A 70-year-old woman giving away thousands of dollars to strangers based on files she found in a storage unit. Any judge in this state will see that for what it is. Corinne stepped forward. A woman your age, writing checks to people she's never met, based on instructions from a dead man. It sounds like exactly the kind of thing a court would want to look into. Vivian looked at her daughter-in-law. She looked at the rings on her fingers. 3 of them. Each one probably worth more than a month of Lucia Sandoval's rent. She looked at the careful blonde highlights in Corinne's hair and the leather handbag on the counter that still had the department store tag dangling from the handle. She did not say what she was thinking. She was Jean's wife, and Jean had taught her, by example, that silence was its own kind of power. Instead, she said, "You should talk to a lawyer before you make promises like that, Graydon." I am a lawyer. You're a real estate attorney. You handle property closings and title searches. This is not your area. It was the sharpest thing Vivian had ever said to her son. She watched the words land and saw him flinch. Rosie arrived 20 minutes later. Vivian had called her while Graydon was pacing the living room, making phone calls to colleagues. Rosie walked through the front door with the look of someone arriving at a fire, wide-eyed, breathless, afraid. "What's happening?" she asked. Graydon told her. He told her about the trust, about the storage unit, about the money Vivian was giving away. He made it sound like madness. He made it sound like their mother had lost touch with reality. Rosie listened. She looked at her mother. She looked at her brother. Then she said something that surprised everyone in the room, including herself. "Have you been to the storage unit, Gray?" "No." "Then maybe you should go before you call a judge." Graydon stared at her. "Rosie, this isn't about what's in the storage unit. This is about Mom's capacity to make decisions. Mom's been making decisions her whole life," Rosie said. "She made the decision to raise you. She made the decision to stay married to Dad for 48 years. She made the decision to keep this family together when you left for law school and didn't come home for 2 Christmases. And now she's making the decision to continue something Dad started. The least you can do is look at what it was before you try to take it away from her." The room went silent. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking the space between what had been said and what could not be taken back. Outside, A car passed on Harwell Street, its headlights sweeping across the kitchen window and then disappearing. Graydon left without another word. Corinne followed, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. The front door closed behind them with a sound that was not quite a slam but was close. Rosie sat down at the kitchen table across from her mother. "Tell me everything," she said. And Vivian did. Did you expect that? Neither did Vivian. If this moment gave you chills, let me know in the comments. Just one word. How do you feel right now? The next morning, Vivian made a phone call she had been putting off. She opened Jean's journal to the entry about Warren Tully, the man whose wife's medical bills Jean had paid 7 years ago. She had seen his name in the binder too, that brief notation. Tully, W., medical bills, spouse terminal illness, $8,000. That she had passed over without understanding. Now she understood. Henri had given her Warren's phone number. He lived in Greystone, 5 miles from the library, in a small house he had bought after his wife, Catherine, died. He had been a practicing attorney in Burlington for 30 years before retiring early, and Henri said he was the kind of man who still believed the law was supposed to protect people, not just the people who could afford it. When Vivian called and told him who she was, the line was silent for a long time. "Jean Ashford," Warren said finally. "You're Jean, that quiet man at the potluck dinners. He was the one. He was the one." Another silence. Vivian heard Warren clear his throat. When he spoke again, his voice was rougher. "What do you need, Vivian?" "I need a lawyer. My son is trying to have me declared incompetent. He won't succeed. I need to be sure." Warren drove to Vivian's house that afternoon. He was 58, with a neatly trimmed beard and a habit of pausing before he spoke, as if weighing each word on a small internal scale. He sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Graydon had delivered his threats the night before, and Warren reviewed the trust document, the power of attorney Graydon had used, and Jean's journal. "The trust is ironclad," Warren said. "Graydon has no claim to it. The power of attorney he had you sign covers your existing accounts and property, but it has no authority over an irrevocable trust established by a separate party. Jean set this up correctly." "And the incompetency petition?" Warren shook his head. "To have someone declared incompetent, you need medical evidence of cognitive impairment. You'd need doctors, evaluations, testimony. Graydon is a real estate attorney making an empty threat. No judge would entertain this petition based on the fact that a woman is choosing to continue her late husband's charitable work." He paused. "However, the power of attorney itself is problematic. You signed it within 48 hours of your husband's death while in acute grief, without independent legal advice. That's not proper procedure. I can file to have it revoked." "Do it," Vivian said. Warren's first action, even before the formal petition, was a phone call to Graydon's office. The power of attorney did not authorize the seizure of personal property, he explained, and if the spare car key was not returned within 24 hours, he would file a motion for its recovery along with a harassment complaint. The key appeared in Vivian's mailbox the next morning, taped to a blank index card. No note, no apology. But the key was there, and the car was fully hers again. Then Warren opened Jean's journal to a page he had marked. "There's one more thing." Jean kept detailed records of his trust. Every deposit, every withdrawal, every payment. But there are also notes about Graydon. Recent notes. He turned the journal toward Vivian. She read Jean's handwriting. "Graydon's firm is in trouble. Overextended on 3 development projects. He borrowed against the house and hasn't told Corinne. Estimated debt, $180,000. I wish I could help him, but he wouldn't accept help. Not from me, and not the way I give it. If I die before this is resolved, Graydon will come for Vivian's money. I know my son. I know what he has become. The trust will protect her. I hope my son finds his way back, but I can't let Vivian pay the price while he's lost." Vivian read the passage 3 times. Each time, the words cut a little deeper. Jean had known. He had watched their son drowning in debt and pride and ambition, and he had done the only thing he could do from a distance. He had built a wall around Vivian. He knew, Vivian whispered. He prepared for the worst and hoped for the best, Warren said. That's what good accountants do. Despite everything, Vivian almost smiled. We're approaching the moment everything changes. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. You don't want to miss what happens next. Over the following week, Warren filed the petition to revoke the power of attorney. He sent formal notice to Graydon that any attempt to sell the house on Harwell Street would be contested. He also sent a letter to Pinecrest Senior Living, canceling the reservation for room 14B. Graydon responded with silence. No phone calls, no visits, no legal filings. The silence was worse than the threats. Vivian knew her son well enough to know that silence meant he was planning. Meanwhile, Vivian continued Jean's work. She visited the storage unit 3 times that week. She updated the spreadsheets on the laptop. She paid a water bill for a family in Rutland who had received a shutoff notice. She sent grocery cards to 2 families Henri had identified, and she decided it was time to meet Lucia Sandoval. She did not plan to reveal who she was. She would follow Jean's rules. She would be invisible. But she needed to see, with her own eyes, the face of one of the people Jean had been helping. She needed to make the numbers real. On a cold Tuesday morning, Vivian drove to the apartment complex on the east side of Greystone. Building C, apartment 4C. She had the address memorized from Jean's file. The hallway of Building C smelled like cooking oil and laundry detergent and the particular staleness of a building where the ventilation had never worked properly. The carpet was thin and stained. The fluorescent light above the stairwell flickered with a rhythm like a slow heartbeat. Apartment 4C was on the 2nd floor. Vivian stood in the hallway and listened. Through the door, she could hear a television playing a morning show. A child's voice asking a question. A woman's voice answering, tired but patient. She almost turned around. This was too close. Jean had never come this close. Jean had kept his distance because distance was part of the design. But Vivian was not Jean. She knocked. The woman who opened the door was younger than Vivian expected. 35, according to the file, but she looked older. Dark circles under her eyes. Hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. She wore green hospital scrubs, the kind that night shift workers wear home because they are too tired to change. A small girl stood behind her, clutching a stuffed elephant, peering around her mother's leg with curious brown eyes. "Can I help you?" Lucia Sandoval asked. Vivian had prepared nothing. No story. No explanation. She looked at this woman, at the exhaustion in her face and the wariness in her eyes and the child hiding behind her leg, and she said the first thing that came to her. "A friend of mine asked me to check on you. He wanted to make sure you were all right." Lucia's expression changed. The wariness shifted into something else. Recognition. Not of Vivian, of the pattern. "Tom," Lucia said. Vivian's breath caught. "You know that name? I never met him. But he helped us. Twice. Once when my car broke down and I almost lost my job because I couldn't get to the hospital for my shifts. Someone paid for the repair. And then last month, someone paid 2 months of our rent. The super said a woman delivered the money, but she wouldn't give a name." Lucia paused. "Is Tom your friend?" Vivian looked at this young mother standing in her doorway in wrinkled scrubs, holding everything together with nothing but will and exhaustion. And she thought about Jean's journal. About the boy who lost his father at 12 and spent the rest of his life making sure other families didn't lose everything the way his mother had. "He was my husband," Vivian said. The word slipped out before she could stop it. Jean would not have approved. Jean would have stayed invisible. But Vivian was 70 years old, and she was tired of secrets, tired of walls, tired of kindness that hid behind locked doors and fake names. Lucia stared at her. "Was? He passed away 3 months ago." Lucia's hand went to her mouth. The little girl tugged at her mother's scrubs and asked who the lady was. "Come in," Lucia said. "Please, come inside." The apartment was small and clean. A couch with a blanket folded on one arm, a kitchen table with 2 chairs, drawings taped to the refrigerator in crayon, houses and flowers, and a yellow sun with a smiling face. Lucia made coffee. They sat at the table while the little girl, whose name was Sophia, drew pictures on the floor with a box of markers. Lucia told Vivian her story. She had moved to Greystone 3 years ago after leaving a difficult situation in Hartford. She worked nights at the clinic in Rutland, 12-hour shifts, 4 nights a week. Her mother watched Sophia overnight. The pay was enough to survive, but not enough to absorb any unexpected expense. The car repair had saved her job. The rent payment had saved their home. "I tried to find Tom," Lucia said. "I wrote letters. I left them with the super. I don't know if he ever got them." "He got them," Vivian said. "He kept every one." Lucia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Why didn't he tell anyone? Why didn't he let people thank him?" "Because he wasn't doing it for thanks," Vivian said. "He was doing it because he couldn't not do it." When Vivian left Lucia's apartment, she sat in her car for a long time. The heater was running. The windows were fogged. She could see the outline of the apartment building through the condensation, blurred and soft, like a memory that was still forming. She thought about what she had done. Gene would not have approved. Gene had spent 18 years protecting his anonymity because he believed it was essential to the work. And Vivian had walked into a stranger's apartment and given it away in 30 seconds. She waited for the guilt to come. It didn't. What came instead was a quiet certainty that Gene's way had been right for Gene. But it was not the only way. She was not building a copy of what he had built. She was building something new on the foundation he had left. And her version did not require her to be invisible. She reached into her bag and took out the sealed envelope from Gene's desk drawer, the one with her name on the front. She had been carrying it for days, afraid to open it, afraid of what it might say, afraid that it would be the last new thing she would ever learn about her husband. She opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded once. Gene's handwriting, careful but shaky, written in the final weeks of his life. "Dear Vivian, if you're reading this, then you found the storage unit. And if you found the storage unit, then, I'm sorry I never told you. I thought about it every day. Every Tuesday when I drove to that storage unit, I thought about coming home and sitting you down and telling you everything. But I could never find the words that would make you understand why I had to keep it separate. Why it had to be mine alone. It wasn't because I didn't trust you. You are the most trustworthy person I have ever known. It was because I was afraid that if I shared it, it would become something different, something smaller, something that needed approval and permission and consensus. And the people I was helping didn't have time for consensus. They needed help now. Today. Before the eviction notice. Before the furnace broke. Before the medicine ran out. I know that Graydon will try to take control of your finances after I'm gone. I've watched him change over the years, and it breaks my heart. He was such a good boy. I don't know where the hardness came from. Maybe from me. Maybe I was so busy helping strangers that I forgot to help my own son become the man he should have been. That's my greatest regret. The trust will protect you. Warren Tully will help you if you need a lawyer. Clyde and Henry will support you if you choose to continue the work. But Vivian, you don't have to continue. You don't owe me this. You don't owe anyone this. If you want to close the storage unit and live the rest of your life in peace, that is your right, and I will love you no less for it. But if you decide to continue, you'll do it better than I did. You always were the braver one. I hid behind a fake name and a locked door. You won't need to hide. You never did. I love you. I loved you from the moment I asked you to dance at that potluck when there was no music playing. I loved you for 48 years, and I will love you for whatever comes after. Gene. Vivian folded the letter and held it against her heart. She sat in the car with the engine running and the heater blowing and the windows fogged, and she cried in a way she had not cried since the day Gene died. Not from grief this time, from gratitude, and from the strange, bittersweet ache of being fully known by someone who was no longer there to see what she would become. When she stopped crying, she wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She looked at herself in the rearview mirror. 70 years old, red-eyed, swollen face, arthritic hands gripping a letter written by a dead man who had loved her more completely than she had ever understood while he was alive. She did not look like a woman who was about to change her life. But she was. The confrontation happened on a Tuesday. Jean would have appreciated the symmetry. Warren had arranged a meeting at his former firm's conference room in Burlington. It was a neutral space, professional, with a long mahogany table and windows that looked out over Church Street. Graydon agreed to attend, presumably because he believed he was negotiating from a position of strength. He arrived with his own attorney, a man named Kepler who specialized in estate law and who looked at Vivian the way people look at a problem they expect to solve quickly. Graydon sat at one end of the table. Corinne sat beside him, her posture rigid, her rings catching the fluorescent light. Kepler opened a leather folder and arranged papers with the efficiency of someone who had done this many times. Vivian sat at the other end of the table. Warren sat beside her. Rosie sat on Vivian's other side. On the table in front of Vivian was a cardboard box. In her coat pocket, Jean's letter pressed against her heart. She had carried it every day since reading it. Not for the words. She had memorized those. But for the feeling of the paper, the texture of his handwriting beneath her fingers, the physical proof that he had believed in her. You always were the braver one. She straightened in her chair. Graydon spoke first. I want to be clear about what we're asking for, he said. We're not trying to take anything from you, Mom. We're asking the court to appoint a financial conservator to oversee your accounts, including the trust. The purpose is to protect you from making decisions that aren't in your best interest. He paused. You've given away thousands of dollars in the past 2 weeks to people you've never met, based on files you found in a storage unit. This is not the behavior of someone who is managing her affairs responsibly. Kepler nodded. We have documentation of the withdrawals. We have the power of attorney. And we're prepared to present testimony from Mrs. Ashford's physician regarding age-related cognitive considerations. Warren leaned forward. What physician? Kepler hesitated. Dr. Farber, Mrs. Ashford's primary care doctor, has agreed to provide a general statement about cognitive changes associated with aging. A general statement, Warren repeated. Not a specific evaluation of Vivian's cognitive function, because Dr. Farber has not conducted such an evaluation, because Vivian has never shown any signs of cognitive impairment. Kepler adjusted his papers. Graydon's jaw tightened. Warren continued. The power of attorney your client obtained was signed within 48 hours of Mr. Ashford's death. Mrs. Ashford was in acute grief. She was not provided independent legal counsel. She was not given time to review the documents. Under Vermont law, this constitutes undue influence at minimum and potentially coercion. That's a strong accusation, Graydon said. It's an accurate one, Warren replied. The room went quiet. Vivian had been watching this exchange the way she watched everything now, carefully, patiently, the way Jean had taught her by example. She had been waiting for the right moment, and the right moment was now. Graydon, Vivian said. Everyone turned to look at her. I brought something I'd like you to see. She opened the cardboard box. Inside were Jean's binders, his journal, and the letters and photographs from the corkboard in storage unit C17. She placed the first binder on the table. This is 2008, the year your father helped 11 families stay in their homes during the financial crisis. He used money he earned doing freelance accounting work under a different name. Every dollar is documented. She placed the second binder. This is 2014, 9 families, medical bills, school tuition, heating oil for 3 elderly couples. She placed the third binder. This is 2020, 14 families. It was the busiest year. People were losing everything. Binder after binder. Year after year. Vivian stacked them on the conference table until there was no room left. Then she opened the box of letters, thank you cards, photographs, children's drawings. She spread them across the table the way Jean had pinned them to the corkboard, a mosaic of gratitude from people who had been falling and had been caught by a man they never knew. Your father helped more than 200 families over 18 years, Vivian said. He never told any of them his real name. He never asked for thanks. He never told me. He never told you. He did it because he believed it mattered. She picked up Jean's journal and opened it to the page about Jean's father. She slid it across the table to Graydon. Read this, she said. You've never been told this story. Neither had I until 2 weeks ago. Graydon looked at the journal. He did not pick it up immediately. His eyes moved from the journal to the binders, to the letters, to the photographs. His face was changing. The cold control that had defined him for the past several weeks was dissolving, layer by layer, like ice in running water. He picked up the journal and read. The room was silent except for the sound of a clock on the wall and the distant hum of traffic on Church Street. Vivian watched her son read about the grandfather he had never known. The grandfather who went bankrupt and left. The grandmother who worked 2 jobs and died too young. The boy who grew up with a wound so deep he spent the rest of his life trying to prevent it in others. When Graydon looked up, his eyes were red. Vivian spoke quietly. Your father knew you were in trouble, Graydon. He knew about the debt. He knew about the failed investments. He wrote about it in his journal. She did not read the specific passage aloud. She did not need to. Graydon's face told her that he understood. He wanted to help you, Vivian continued, but he knew you wouldn't accept it. So he did the only thing he could. He made sure that when he was gone, you couldn't take from me what he had spent 18 years building for others. She paused. I'm not angry with you, Graydon. Your father wasn't angry with you either. He was worried about you. He loved you. But he wasn't going to let you destroy what he built. And neither am I. Graydon sat very still. Beside him, Corinne was staring at the table, her arms no longer crossed, her posture no longer rigid. She looked smaller than she had when she walked in. Kepler leaned toward Graydon and whispered something. Graydon shook his head. I'd like to withdraw the petition, Graydon said. His voice was hoarse. There is no petition yet, Warren said. You haven't filed one. Then I won't be filing one. Graydon stood up. He looked at his mother across the table, across the binders and the letters and the photographs of families he had never known existed. He opened his mouth to say something, closed it, and then said the only thing that mattered. I'm sorry, Mom. Vivian looked at her son. She looked at him the way Jean must have looked at the strangers he helped, with a clear-eyed compassion that did not require the other person to be perfect. That only required them to be human. Your father helped people who had nowhere else to turn, Vivian said. He gave them second chances. You should know that he would have given you one, too. Graydon picked up his briefcase and walked out of the conference room. Corinne followed. Kepler gathered his papers, nodded to Warren, and left. Rosie reached across the table and squeezed her mother's hand. Dad would be proud of you, she said. Vivian looked at the binders and the letters spread across the table. She looked at the children's drawings and the thank you cards and the photographs of families she had never met but now carried in her heart. He would have done the same thing, she said. He just would have done it quieter. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Share it with someone who needs to remember that the most powerful thing a person can do is help someone else without ever being asked. And leave one word in the comments. Just one word that describes how you feel right now. Because stories like this one remind us that the best chapters of a life don't always get written first. Sometimes they come last. 1 year later, Vivian Ashford sat in storage unit C17 on a Tuesday morning with a cup of black coffee and a fresh notebook with a leather cover she had bought to match Jean's. The room looked much the same as it had the day she first opened it. The desk, the filing cabinets, the corkboard. But there were changes. New photographs on the board, new thank you cards. A drawing from a child in green crayon that said, "Thank you, V." The laptop was open to the second start spreadsheet. Vivian had added 37 new names in the past year. 37 families who had been falling and had been caught. She was not doing it alone anymore. Warren had helped her establish the Second Start Foundation as a registered nonprofit. It was small by design. No office, no staff, no newsletter. Jean would have approved. The foundation received donations from a handful of people who had learned about Jean's work and wanted to contribute, but Vivian kept the operation as quiet as Jean had kept it. Henri still identified families through the library. She had a notebook of her own now, and she and Vivian met every Thursday at the library to review new cases. Clyde still managed the storage facility. He kept the corridor around C-17 clean and well lit, and he had installed a small space heater in the unit so Vivian would be comfortable during the Vermont winters. He never charged her extra for the electricity. Rosie had started a project at her high school. She taught her students about anonymous kindness, about helping without recognition, about the power of doing good without expecting anything in return. She called it the Invisible Hand Project. Jean would have groaned at the name. He was not a man for grand titles, but he would have been proud. Lucia Sandoval had found a permanent position at a hospital in Burlington with better pay and full benefits. She volunteered at the foundation on weekends, organizing files and writing follow-up notes. Sophia, now 8, drew pictures for the corkboard every time she visited. And Graydon. 2 months after the meeting in Burlington, a check arrived in Vivian's mailbox. It was from Graydon. The amount was modest. There was no letter with it, no note, no apology beyond the one he had already given. Just a check, written to the Second Start Foundation. Vivian filed it in the ledger. Beside the entry, she wrote 2 words: second chance. Graydon sent a check every month after that. The amounts grew slowly. He never visited the storage unit. He never asked about the families. But the checks kept coming, steady and reliable, the way his father's work had been steady and reliable for 18 years. Vivian did not know if Graydon would ever fully understand what Jean had built or why. She did not know if the hardness in her son would soften enough to let the light back in. But the checks were a beginning, and Jean had taught her that beginnings were enough. On this Tuesday morning, 1 year after she had first opened the door to C-17, Vivian opened her new notebook and wrote her first entry. Today, I helped a family keep their home. The father lost his job last month. The mother works part-time at the school cafeteria. They have 3 children under 10. Rent was 2 months behind. I covered it through the foundation. They will never know my name. She paused. Then she wrote one more line beneath it. Jean would have done the same. She closed the notebook and looked around the room. Jean's photograph still sat on the desk, the one of her laughing in the backyard 20 years ago. She still did not remember what she had been laughing at, but she thought that maybe she was laughing because Jean had said something unexpected. He was always doing that, saying quiet things that turned out to be more important than anyone realized at the time. She picked up her coffee and took a long sip. It was black, the way Jean had always drunk his. She had never liked black coffee before. She liked it now. It tasted like Tuesday mornings and purpose and a love that did not end when a heart stopped beating. Vivian Ashford was 71 years old. She had buried her husband. She had faced down her son. She had walked 3 miles in the cold to find a secret that had been hidden for 18 years. And she had decided, in the small, quiet space of a storage unit on Industrial Way, to continue a mission that was never supposed to be seen. She finished her coffee, closed the laptop, and turned off the space heater. She gathered her bag and her keys and Jean's journal, which she still carried with her every time she came. She stepped out of C-17 and pulled the rolling door down behind her. The metal rattled against the concrete floor and then settled into silence. Outside, the first snow of the season was falling over Greystone. Small flakes, barely visible against the gray sky, drifting down through the cold air and settling on the chain-link fence and the gravel parking lot and the roof of Vivian's car. She stood there for a moment, watching the snow fall. Then she locked the door, put the key in her pocket, and walked toward the car. Behind her, Storage Unit C-17 sat in its row of identical doors, gray and scratched and ordinary. No different from C13 or C14 or any of the others. There was nothing on the outside to suggest what was inside. Nothing to indicate that behind that plain metal door, a quiet man had spent 18 years changing lives. And nothing to indicate that his wife, at 71 years old, was just getting started. Thank you for staying until the end. If Vivian's story reminded you that the people we love are sometimes deeper than we know, and that it is never too late to discover a new purpose, then share this story with someone who needs to hear it today. Leave one word in the comments. One word that captures what you're feeling right now. And remember what Gene wrote in his journal all those years ago. Kindness works best when nobody is watching. But sometimes, the people who are watching are the ones who carry it forward.